Very excited about this interview. Joining us here on the program, our first realtor, but our first sort of real estate focused person here on the show. Someone who, it feels kind of like a throwback because I used to have Dane on my radio show many a times back when he was just Dane, but now he is County Commissioner Dane Scalise. So Commissioner, thanks for joining us here on the program. I appreciate it.
Tyler, it is an absolute delight to be with you. As you have rightly pointed out, this is not the first time that you and I have been in this sort of setting together.
That's true.
We've done it many times where we've sat down, mics in front of us, and chatted about the state of affairs in New Hanover County. And you're right to point out that I am not a realtor or directly employed in the real estate industry, but it is an industry that is very important to me and certainly touches a lot of the different things that we do at New Hanover County. And my role as county commissioner, in large part, has to do with land use and property taxes and revaluations, and I understand that's probably a little bit of what we're going to talk about today.
It is. And I'm going to need you to, can you push the mic a little bit closer to you?
Absolutely.
I mean, you're acting like an amateur, Dane. Come on. We never had this problem.
But I project well. I have a very good voice that carries. I thought maybe I could get a little distance there.
Well, that's true. I mean, I would have to stop the interview if you hadn't projected so well being so far from the mic. But I mean, real quick though, I do want to talk about something just because I remember one time I had you on the show, and a mutual friend of ours who is a very smart individual.
Yeah.
But I remember him.
We've only got one or two.
Yeah, that's true.
Really,
I was going to say, I might be giving that away. But I remember him kind of ridiculing me for asking you a question about the COVID-19 virus that at the time was only in California.
Yeah.
And he said, why are you asking Dane about some virus in California? And then like 3 weeks later, the whole world shut down. And so I remember that was you were one of the first people I ever talked to about the coronavirus.
That was a wild time. I remember actually that interview very well. I was the chair of Wilmington Downtown Incorporated at the time, and we had a big event planned where hundreds of people were going to come together in downtown. And I think I was, at least trying to project confidence and a lack of concern. And I said, I think we're going to be just fine. We're going to roll right through this thing, maybe a week, maybe a month, but no big deal. Oh, obviously ended up not being the case.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I forgot, if I remember correctly, on the air, you had said that you would give me a spot at table one, and then the event got canceled. I never got that spot, so I'm gonna have to call in that IOU because I completely forgot about it.
Actually, I've delivered that many times, including at the last Power Breakfast. You sat at the Griffin East Step table.
That's true. That is very true. Us and two other people. But Dane, let's actually start with something that directly impacted the real estate business, and it was a very contentious debate, as you well know. That was the property tax debate, which. It's always a big issue just because obviously it impacts, the taxes that citizens are paying. But this time, probably most importantly, because of, what's kind of funny is that they, used to do evaluations every 8 years. And I think because of 2008 and just the run up in the property values, they decided to go to every 4 years. I might be wrong on the timeline there, thinking that every 4 years would be less of a drastic move. And then all of a sudden we had COVID-19, property values skyrocketing in the area. And so even with the only 4-year reevaluation, we still had a skyrocketing property reevaluation. And that was another component there. And so just kind of talk us through like what this debate and sort of what your thought process was.
Well, let's start with the revaluation process because that really does frame what ultimately happened with the budget debate itself. You're right to point out that under North Carolina law, counties are required every 8 years to perform property revaluations. You cannot go longer than 8 years without doing a revaluation in any of the 100 counties that are in North Carolina. In the mid-2010s, New Hanover County determined that it was going to change that to a 4-year period. So every 4 years, we were going to do revaluation. And the idea was certainly to attempt to reduce the sticker shock that would sometimes come from a place where we had actually largely rising property values. And people were a bit surprised to see, oh my goodness, my property was worth X, and now it's worth X times 2. And that's a bit of a surprise anytime. In some ways, it's a good thing, right? Because it means that the value of your property is greater than it was before. Your personal wealth is greater than it was before.
You can do a cash out equity.
That's right. Absolutely. Do you know a guy that they can talk to if they're interested in that?
I might know a guy.
But it also is something that needs to be considered in the context of the funding of local government, because local government, both the county and the city, is primarily funded through the assessment of property taxes. So the property tax rate is set every year for the following fiscal year. Fiscal year runs from July 1 to June 30 of every year. And in the lead up to July 1, county and city and other local governments have to determine, what are we going to set the tax rate at to reflect the true needs of the community and to also avoid, hopefully, overly onerous taxation on the population, scaring businesses away, hurting seniors, making sure that our sheriff and our schools get funded properly. All these things have to be taken into consideration. And I don't think that it's an exaggeration to say that it's actually the primary role of local government officials is to set the tax rate each year. Yes, you have a lot of other things that you do, including evaluating whether or not a rezoning should move forward, and including whether or not you're going to set various ordinances and other policies. But the primary role of local government is to set the tax rate and then derive from the tax rate the revenue that you're going to use to pay for the public services that the public requires. So this time around, we were a little bit sticker shook and sticker shocked because even though it had only been 4 years since our last revaluation, which happened in 2021, the property values absolutely went through the roof, which should not really be a surprise. Yeah. Maybe it was a little bit, but I don't think that anyone who is a prognosticator would be surprised to hear at a minimum that the values of property in New Hanover were going to go up. Why? Because a lot of people moved to New Hanover County, especially since 2021. Yeah. We continually have seen reports where New Hanover County, Wilmington, is called out as per capita one of the highest and most inbound places for folks coming to this area or to a area from elsewhere, right? So necessarily what that means is because property was being traded, bought, sold, it's going to increase in value. We're obviously adding new inventory to the county stock over the course of those years, and those are being bought and sold, and all that drives property values up. And we saw people who, whenever they got their property revaluations, were seeing as high as 300% increases. Now, that's not what it was for everybody.
Yeah.
The average was about 67%. But that's a lot.
That is a lot.
That's a heck of a lot. My property went up 101%. A lot of people's property went up approximately that amount. Some people's went down very few. Most everybody's went up. And again, I'd argue that that's a good thing. What it does is it allows for the individual who owns the home, even if they have a mortgage on the home, to now presumably have a little bit more equity than they did previously. And ultimately, home ownership has always been one of the fundamental aspects of the American economy, the American experiment. Property ownership is incredibly important. But how do we determine how much we're going to assess as far as a tax on those property owners? And it's not just residential property owners. Of course, people own commercial property, they own raw land. There's all kinds of different property ownership that exist in the county. And the county has to determine, what are we going to set the rate at, and we have to get it done by June 30. Well, the rate prior to this most recent budget, and we just began the new budget cycle today, July 1st, was whenever we're recording it. And the rate was previously set at 45 cents per $100 of value. If we were to leave the rate at the then prevailing rate of 45 cents and include all of the property value increases, we would have resulted in approximately $150, $160 million in new revenue to the New Hanover County government. Now, I am not embarrassed to tell you, I do not believe under any circumstance that the county or its citizens would benefit from the county government taking an additional $150, $160 million from the citizens.
What is the budget?
The budget was approximately $445.
Okay.
That would have pushed it into the area of $600 million.
So that's a significant increase.
That's exactly right. And what I have been desirous of from the beginning was to figure out how we could get as close as possible to revenue neutral. What does revenue neutral means? What does it mean? It means, how do we set the tax rate in a way that reflects roughly the same amount of revenue that the county is deriving from the population, our citizens, adjusting the tax rate to reflect essentially that same amount of money that we're taking in. So you have to lower the tax rate in order to do that. The actual revenue neutral number relative to the increase in values in the community would have been 29.2 cents. And there were a lot of proposals over the course of a 4-month period where staff said, well, we'd like for you to set it at 36. Well, no, 35.5. No, 35 cents. They went back and forth, ultimately landed on the rate of 35 cents per $100 of value. And there was a proposal to agree with that, and then there was a proposal to reduce that amount to 33.9 cents, but it also included borrowing a bunch of money in order to achieve that rate. I thought that was an artificial lowering of the rate that I wasn't in favor of. At the end of the day, we landed at 30.6, which is a 1.4 cent increase off of revenue neutral. It effectively means about $11 million in new spending for the county as compared to last year. So we're still roughly around the $450 million mark for our budget. There are some people that have been critical of the budget because we did, in fact, reduce the size and scope of government. Absolutely, we did that. But I think that it's worth pointing out that we didn't slash and cut the government. We only increased it by a mere $11 million versus $50 or $150 million that some other people were considering as an appropriate increase. So New Hanover, of course, has had inflation. Yep. It has had increased costs, just like any number of other industries, which is why I was willing to go a little bit above revenue neutral to pay for those things. I also wanted to make sure, for instance, that we gave more money to the schools, we gave more money to the sheriff, we gave more money to senior resources, to veterans. We needed to upgrade our 911 communication system. There were some things that I think are very easy to sell as necessities. And then there are quite a few other items that I just personally believe are more wants than needs. And I wanted those to take a backseat in the budget negotiations, and that's ultimately, I would argue, what we achieved.
Well, I mean, it does seem sort of, I mean, you could see the argument where people would say, all right, as you pointed out, we got all these new people that have moved here.
Yep.
So home prices have gone up. So, from that perspective, you're going to say, okay, it is probably going to cost us more money to operate the government. And also, we're going to see more wear and tear on the roads. We're going to see more wear and tear on the infrastructure. We're going to, we're going to need new infrastructure with, all these conversations about the bridge, about all these things and how we're going to pay for it. So I think if that was sort of the fundamental debate, like if that was, okay, we're going to use that money to go to all of those things, which you pointed out, we did increase those things. And
we did. I call those core services. Mm-hmm. And I'm in favor of increasing funding as needed to core services. However, core services are statutorily defined items.
Yeah.
There are a bunch of other things that the county has done, mostly, I would argue, in the very recent history, starting especially during COVID, that we should have done, and I argue don't need to continue doing. For instance, there were any number of items that we were paying for with temporary money through the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA dollars, right? Well, once those dollars went away, what are you going to use to pay for whatever these newfangled programs were that you came up with? You'd have to go directly to the taxpayer of New Hanover, and you'd have to say, are you going to continue to pay for these items? And they don't really get to say. I mean, they can say in the sense that they can tell the commissioners what they want to do, but at the end of the day, 5 people determine what the budget is going to be, and a majority prevails. And in this particular budget cycle, the majority ultimately determined that we were going to get more honed in on core services, that we were going to focus more on needs versus wants, which is not to say that hard compromises weren't made. They were. But at the end of the day, we also have to think about setting that tax rate. And for those individuals that were going to be burdened by their very wonderful property going up, but we're going to then make them pay a lot more taxes whenever they're also paying higher insurance, higher in the form of other taxes that are out there, the wear and tear, the inflation, all the other things. At some point, something has to give, and my position is that the county government had to do a little bit more to reflect what it is that other people are doing in their households. We had to live within our means. One point that I want to make, and I'm going to turn it over to you real fast, just because this is a point of confusion a lot of times for folks. County governments do not do roads.
Okay.
We do not pay for roads. The state government and the city of Wilmington primarily are responsible for streets and roads in our community. But almost overwhelmingly, the major road systems throughout our state are paid for by NCDOT. The county is not in the road business. No county is in the road business. And I just want to point that out because a lot of times people say, why aren't you spending it on those items? Well, that's not how we have it set up in North Carolina. In fact, an interesting little factoid is that North Carolina has the second highest number of state-maintained roads behind Texas. What does that mean? Well, it just means even though there are other states, like, for instance, Pennsylvania, that may have more overall roads than North Carolina, the roads are maintained by the state in North Carolina and in Texas. And so the state has to step up and help pay for those infrastructure items that you're talking about. And they do, but easier said than done whenever you have as many roads as we do.
Well, I'm guessing it's mostly because a lot of the expansion has happened. It's like the extension of highways, which the DOT got involved in. Like you look at College Road, you look at, Olean. I mean, these are all roads that sort of interconnect with highways.
Yep.
So I'm assuming that's
No,
why
you're
that's
exactly
happening.
right.
Okay.
Absolutely. And again, think about the wear and tear. Think about the people who live here, but also think about the people who live in Raleigh and in Charlotte and in Greensboro. Whenever you've got the state DOT paying for the infrastructure in all of those areas, and that's where the largest number of people in North Carolina are living. I mean, you can imagine, while we get a good amount of money, and thankfully we do, because we actually have great leadership in the NC General Assembly. Obviously, Senator Lee, Senator Rabin.
Which has not always been the case.
Representative Miller, Representative Davis, Representative Butler, all work hard for the people of this community, and we really do have people that have traction in that area. We also have a great DOT representative in this area, Landon Zimmer, who is a very good advocate for DOT-related issues in this area. So that whole team does a good job of getting us money, but it also is worth understanding, again, we're small relative to some of those other areas of North Carolina.
Well, I think that is one of the benefits also of the growth, because a lot of people talk about the growth, and they get very upset about it, but it's also put us on the map on the state level with regards to us getting that money, which 40 years ago, even though, you can go back and say, you can look at some of the powerful senators that we had down here. Right. I'm totally blanking. Who was the guy in Brunswick County? I'm totally blanking on his name. He was like a senator for like 40, 50 years. He was a pretty powerful guy. Remember, he had Raven's seat beforehand? I'm totally blanking on him. I'm going to put it in the show notes. But, he was a powerful senator. But other than that, we didn't have a lot of powerful legislators that had a lot of, juice up in Raleigh. And it feels like now we do have that because we've grown and so many people know about Wilmington and New Hanover County and just the Tri-County area that we can't say, hey, we need this money from DOT or whatever it may be. But, one thing I did want to point out is one of the things I think that gets lost in the debate is when we're talking about property taxes, people say, oh, this is about, people who are on fixed income, people who are already living in a house.
Right.
100% agree. But it's also about coming from the mortgage side, the purchaser side, is that we're at a, because of how much property values have gone up and we have not seen that increase. Incomes have gone up, but not that much. We are seeing more and more people who are just on the, on the line qualifying. And if property taxes go up, you could have people not qualify to buy a home. And so that's who else gets impacted.
100% agree.
And they're paying a much larger mortgage payment because the home price is a lot more and interest rates are higher. So they're dealing with that. They're dealing with the insurance and now a higher property tax. They cannot qualify for the house.
Keeping the tax rate at a reasonable level is absolutely necessary for the health of an economy, health of the real estate economy, health of the economy more broadly. It's not just those folks, Tyler. It's also renters, because the people who ultimately are paying the property tax, who are the owner of a, say, commercial building or a apartment complex, well, they're going to pass whatever they're paying in terms of increased taxes on their property onto the renters. It is an inevitable part of capitalism that you're going to see that. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. That's the market responding accordingly. Mm-hmm. But the lower that the tax rate can reasonably be, the less that the impact is going to be felt, not just by homeowners, home buyers, but also renters in our community. So I think a lower tax rate ultimately benefits everybody. Again, I think the economy is most benefited whenever there is a reasonably low tax rate.
Yeah. And I mean, as you said, as long as we're paying for those core services and we're providing an adequate increase that we can keep the people in those jobs to do those services,
right?
I think that's sort of a win-win for everyone. A lot of people are going to ask, what role does the endowment play in all this? Because, we sold the hospital, we got this huge chunk of money, we got this ton of money just sitting in the bank, and people go, why don't we just use that whenever we need some additional funding? And I know it's a separate organization, but it did seem like in this case, they actually did kind of step up and say some of the funding that maybe we weren't going to provide, they were going to provide that.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Look, my view on this issue is not very complex. It's actually pretty simple. We sold New Hanover County Hospital. I was not yet on the commission whenever that happened, but there was a decision made to sell the hospital and use the proceeds of that sale to create the New Hanover Community Endowment. The corpus, the amount of money that's essentially available for the endowment's purposes, is approximately $1.6 billion as of today, a very large amount of money.
Yeah.
Now, in order to maintain that corpus, you wouldn't want to just stroke a check for $1.6 billion for some basic project. You'd rather make sure that you're essentially using the investment or interest proceeds to give a certain amount of money out every year, say $50 to $70 million. That way you can continue to grow the corpus, but you can also continue to give money to the community to help it in a variety of different ways. My argument has been that the organization that we set up, the endowment, is the best suited to invest in nonprofit, non-governmental organization ventures, because essentially the county government playing favorites in picking certain nonprofits versus others to give taxpayers to smacks me as ultimately an improper exercise of the county government's authority and taxing power, especially whenever you consider that we have a body that was set up explicitly to fund deserving nonprofit, non-governmental organizations. So the endowment stepped up in a pretty big way and essentially said, we know that you've been providing a couple $1 million to these various NGOs for the last 7, 8, 9 years. We're going to take that off your hands this year, and that is a policy shift, actually, for New Hanover County, where rather than pay for those things moving forward, we are going to be directing those organizations to the endowment, and we're pleased that the endowment is stepping up to say we're going to handle these things. And you know what? They really have stepped up in a huge way over the last couple of years. Some projects that they funded that have been really important from my perspective. There was a nursing pipeline investment that they made in the neighborhood of, I think, about $25 million. Essentially, the idea was to train and retain nurses in our community. We were having nurses being trained at CFCC, the community college, and UNCW. And then they were leaving to go to Raleigh or Charlotte. And instead what we said was, we're going to actually help you get trained up in our local schools, and then we're going to want you to stay around. And we're going to help you pay for your tuition, maybe help you with some rental assistance. But it's a really great initiative because, as you know, we needed to keep more healthcare professionals in this area. That's one of the reasons why it's been really hard on our area. Another one that's actually, I think, very meaningful that is directly related to your industry is an investment last year of almost $20 million into helping to create adequate and affordable housing in the community. So they put millions of dollars on the line to essentially say, we're going to invest in these items to help build up the stock that people think is appropriate, to help offset some of the expenses related to housing. And there are a lot of different ways that looks. Ultimately, the New Hanover County government had spent about $9 million over the past 3 years on a proposition similar to that. And my argument was, rather than continue on with that, I'd really prefer for, again, the endowment to step up on those items. I think that's the appropriate place for those investments to occur. But they have the money to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that they will do it.
Now, let's talk about sort of kind of housing in general. You know, affordable housing. This is a huge issue because of all the people that have moved here.
Right.
And this big debate about, you know, it's this sort of chicken egg debate. It's like, is the development causing the influx of people, or is the influx of people causing the development?
Right.
I'm under the belief that people are going to move here no matter what. And if we aren't building, the people who are already here, because you have a lot of people that move here whose incomes have no relationship to this economy.
Right.
And so they, you know, prices can rise exponentially. It doesn't matter to them. They're still going to be able to pay for it. The people whose incomes are tied to this economy have a ceiling on what those prices can rise to before they may have to look outside of Wilmington, New Hanover County, whatever it may be. And so how do we balance that? Because, I mean, I know you get a lot of texts, emails, whatever, people upset about how much this area is changing with development. It looks like every time something gets torn down, it turns into apartment complexes. But at the same time, we need things like that in order to supply the housing for the people that are coming here.
We do, but it also is what you just said. It's a balancing act. So I am not an extremist on this subject. Mm-hmm. There are people that believe that the only solution is to build. We're going to build our way through this. There are other people that say, absolute moratorium. I want you to say for the next 50 years, no building is allowed in New Hanover County. Well, I don't agree with either of those points. I think that there are absolutely necessary projects that we need to move forward with. We need to continue to grow and develop at a reasonable level in this area, if for no other reason that it's a huge driver of our economy. Yeah. If you just shut down building and developing in this community, do you have any idea how many jobs, livelihoods, families would be impacted by that on a scale that you can't even imagine? So obviously this moratorium notion is one that is not very feasible. Even the people who are calling for it, if they were to truly understand the economic impact, would, I think, revise their position. But similarly, we do not need to be just approving every single project that comes before the commission. Some projects make more sense than others. I'll be honest with you, I would prefer to see more townhouses and single-family dwellings than apartments. It's not to say that I don't approve of apartments as a necessary function in our society. Certainly, we need a variety of housing inventory options in the community. But I would like to see the personal wealth that people can develop and accumulate in the form of home ownership being emphasized wherever possible. So that, to me, seems like a very responsible way to kind of balance some of the needs of growth and development along with expanding the opportunity for personal wealth development. And there also are opportunities for multifamily that I think that we should look at in the form of adaptive reuse. We have some old buildings in this community that I would sure like some folks to consider rehabbing, overviewing, upgrading, whatever other thing you want to say about it. And I want to harken back to a point that you made also about the other areas that are around us. That shouldn't be seen as the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, that's true.
Building and living in Pender County or Brunswick County or Duplin County or Onslow County and commuting here, while I understand is probably not ideal for everybody, actually makes sense for plenty of people. And they do have more land in those counties than we do in New Hanover. Yeah. It is not an exaggeration to say that we're the second smallest county by land mass in all of North Carolina. And that's not to say that we don't have buildable land. We do. But we have to be more careful, in my opinion, about the future where and when of the building that is contemplated, just so that we're being cautious about protecting our natural environment, but also meeting some of the expectations that our existing citizens have for their housing needs. I also will say, I broadly speaking agree with you. Whenever you have a beautiful beach, whenever you have UNCW, Cape Fear Community College, all of the great restaurants and outdoor activities that we have here, that's going to draw people to the area. And whether we like it or not, COVID demonstrated to a lot of people who were stuck in their beehive apartments in major cities across the United States that they could be open and free and do their even current work from another place. That's a lot of what we've seen here in this area. And I don't know what we do about it other than recognize we are going to have people come here, but I also am going to argue that we can't necessarily, no, not necessarily, we cannot fit the entire world of New Hanover either. So there is a balance that has to be drawn here.
Well, I mean, what's also great is that even though we have seen a lot of people move here, and from whose jobs aren't necessarily tied to this economy, we have seen a real expansion of this economy. I mean, let's face it. I mean, real estate was probably a bigger part of the economy back before you had businesses like PPD and Live Oak and Encino. We're now all of a sudden, I'm totally blank, Megacore.
Yep.
I mean, so you have these very large, nationally known companies who are providing very high-paying jobs.
Yep.
And now all of a sudden, we aren't so reliant on people from D.C. or Boston or New York either moving here or having a second home here where we can now have those houses. And so I think that has been a benefit. But we are always going to be sort of a destination place where people do want to come here in the summer because of the beaches, our awesome, great downtown. And it just, I mean, there is just something about Wrightsville Beach that just is kind of amazing.
economy that has a large component of it based on tourism is not a bad thing.
No.
That keeps it lively. That keeps it engaged. It keeps it youthful.
Yes.
We want to be wanted.
Yes.
That's a very good thing, not just for the people who come here, but for the people who live here. But that's also part of why I'm saying we have to be cautious about the building proposition for the future because, for instance, if we don't have green space for people to go to, people aren't going to want to be here anymore. So leaders like me have to figure out how to balance the equities and say we need to build, but we also need to make sure that we're saving green space, which is part of why I think that you know and perhaps some others know that I've been so deliberate about cultivation of green space. We just recently made an acquisition of 61 acres in essentially the heart of the city of Wilmington that we're going to keep green. Yep. It was previously going to be 700 apartments, and now it's going to be a green space for the people that already live in that area. There have to be solutions like that in order to keep the quality of life in this area high.
Well, that's what I was actually going to ask you about. That's the Early Gardens 2.0.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Because, I mean, that is sort of kind of an interesting component to all of this because we do have some really kind of cool parks. I mean, obviously we got Early Gardens, but we do have, Longleaf Park and now we're going to have, so what's the name of it? Do we know what the name is going to be?
No. Although I am, suggesting that it should be named for Flossie Bryan, the individual who left it to us.
Yeah.
I mean, the Flossie Bryan Nature Preserve or Legacy Park or something along those lines, but that has not been determined yet.
But is there, it's interesting because the reason I bring that up is because sometimes you look at, you go on social media or whatever, and people will post like, wouldn't it be great if we all had places like this where you have sort of like green space, like a smaller green space, but then you also have kind of buildings around it. And so it kind of encourages people to walk.
Oh, I would love for us to do that.
And that's what I'm saying. Is there a way to sort of have that sort of balance instead of just having big parks and then everything else is sort of, housing? If we kind of have green spaces kind of strategically throughout kind of the area.
Well, if you consider that area of town, there's been a very large amount of building previously.
True.
In the River Lights community.
Yeah.
That is all surrounding it.
Yeah.
And then if you go up the road a little bit, there was an old, what was the name of the marina that was there?
Oh, yeah. I know
Watermark Marina.
Yeah.
So Watermark Marina is going to be, a bunch of housing also. And I think both of those are a good thing. River Lights, Watermark Marina. Well, this is actually going to enhance the value of those properties, and it's going to make it a better place for the people who live there to live because they're going to have this green space in immediate proximity. Mm-hmm. I am trying in my conversations with builders and developers to encourage them to be thinking about these things as they're planning projects. I think that there would be a lot less consternation about some of the building and developing that's being contemplated in this community for the future. If, for instance, they were to do a better job and make a more deliberate effort about preserving like a tree line around a property. Right? I mean,
that's a recent controversy, right?
Yeah, well, it's a silly thing, but the truth is...
I agree with you 100%.
If you are not rubbing in people's face, we just clear-cut this whole property. If you're saving some trees, if you're doing a little bit of what you're talking about, we're saying, actually, we're not going to build it out as densely as we might otherwise have. We're going to cultivate some green space here. I think that you'd actually find the community is more tolerant as a whole of the need for growth and development. Now, maybe I'm crazy about that. I mean, certainly there are people, Tyler, that are going to say, no, none. Well, that's not reasonable. Just as the same as it's not reasonable to people that are saying, I'm going to do whatever I want to do with my property, and if that means that I'm building a 10,000 square foot skyscraper, blah, blah. Well, no, I mean, we have limitations in land ordinances that prohibit what you can do and where you can do it, and that's just part of living in polite society. I mean, we are not anarchy, I'm pleased to say. Not yet. Still the rule of law matters in New Hanover County, but finding some reasonable compromise to me includes those folks who are doing building and developing that I think is necessary, taking perhaps a step back and saying, how do I incorporate a little bit more green space to not just make it more palatable for the people that are my neighbors, but also for the people that live there. They're not going to be upset about that. That's going to actually, I think, allow you to command a higher price point if you include that too.
Well, I mean, a mutual friend of ours, Tom Davis, has city block apartments.
Yes.
And on Brunswick Street, I think it is, it has, so his building's right there. And then, of course, across the street, you have more residential properties. And, that street to me is like my ideal street because it has, the trees are all on it. It has, the tree is covering the road.
Yep.
So you have shade. It looks nice. To me, that's like what every street I think should look like, where it's you have a new building, you have people living there, it's built up to a good level, but you also, when you come outside, you don't feel like it's like in the middle of the city. Like you have this like tree coverage, you have a little bit of nature that you can actually see.
Although the middle of the city is quite frankly the perfect place for height and density.
Yeah.
And my hope is that once the New Hanover County Project Grace, is completed, and then the other side of the block is turned into a hotel or whatever else that it is, and hopefully there's a grocery store that's going to be developed across the street. That what that's going to do is that's going to spur on the sale and development of some of that excess property that the city is trying to spin off since its consolidation into the PPD building. Skyline Center, I think it's called now. I can never remember what it's called. Although I'm disappointed. A quick aside.
Nakatomi Towers.
I was asked, what do you think that it should be called? And I said, the City of Wilmington building, Cow Building. I just thought that would be, people would love that. The Cow Building. I mean, they would laugh.
Would you have to like paint it like a cow?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that would be so fun and people would remember it. I mean, I can never, Skyline, Sky Center, I can never remember what it's called. But in any event, the purpose behind their planning, and I'm not there to speak to the wisdom of it one way or the other, but I think it was well-intentioned, at least in this sense. If we consolidate all of our buildings into this one building, then we can sell off these other ones and allow them to be developed in the private sector. And my hope is that, in fact, that is what will happen once some of these other pieces of development in downtown are occurring. Yeah. And then where in downtown you go up, you go dense, I think there are less traffic impacts as a consequence of that, especially if there's a grocery store that's there. Oh, yeah. And that allows for some of these things that we're talking about to be accomplished, and people are in the heart of a vibrant downtown. That's a good thing. Of course, I want to keep historic Wilmington, that section of it, preserved, absolutely. But there's a bunch of other areas that are not historic Wilmington that are absolutely ripe for development if only the smart, right people will approach it in the smart and right way.
Well, you know, it's something, I will admit this, I don't admit this very often, but sort of when I was younger and maybe when I was on the radio a little more vocal in sort of, you know, what role government plays in sort of helping to kind of kickstart some of these developments in downtown. And I'll admit, I probably was against a lot of some of the building that we saw downtown with regard to the Cape Fear Community College. Right. And a lot of that had to do with some of the sort of, they changed some of the projects, and so some people thought that maybe they'd pulled one over on us. But you look at like Union Station, what that sort of did to that area and sort of revitalized it in the development that you've seen sort of around it.
Think about it like an anchor tenant,
yeah,
right? You need to have an anchor in any particular mall or store complex, and that's an anchor that people can build off of and count on to draw people to that area. The new Project Grace Library Museum is going to be an anchor. That grocery store is going to be an anchor. And those are things that are only going to spur on more and better growth and development in an area that, in my, again, opinion, is primed for it. That's where we should actually be putting the density in this community. Downtown can handle it in a way that other places can't. Because quite frankly, if people don't want that, you can avoid downtown pretty easily.
You can. And I think we've, it's funny because I live downtown but I work kind of in the Mayfair area. Yep. And I'll tell you, I mean, the traffic in downtown versus Mayfair area, I mean, downtown seems like a breeze compared to what's happened in Mayfair. And so it seems like, all right, I think we've sort of built out as much as we can in sort of that area, and I understand it because you got some beautiful places over there, access to Wrightsville Beach, but it's like now we need to make sure, okay, we got some other areas where downtown could use some more development.
How's that new bypass or cutoff?
I actually love it because I feel like half the people don't know it's open yet, and so it's always open when I go on it.
I mean, I've driven past it 100 times. I haven't used it yet. And
I use it all the time.
Doesn't seem like anyone's using it yet, although it appears to be a well-designed.
It's perfect.
Traffic configuration.
I mean, you're cutting off. I mean, because let's face it, anyone that's on that road right there, you hit Military and Ole or Eastwood, and all the people turning right and the slowdown that causes in the right lane, you can now just, everyone can cut through that way. It's going to keep everyone who's just going straight to stay on Military. It just makes more sense. But yes, I mean, it's kind of funny because I think most people don't realize it's open because it looks so empty, and so everyone's afraid, I think, to turn. And I just shoot on down there and turn, and then all these people come following me. Yeah. And I'm like, well, you're a leader. Come on.
You're a leader of men.
That is true. That is true. Even to my own detriment in some cases. But yeah, so I think it's things like that where I think that's going to open up that sort of problem trafficked area without having to do anything too drastic. I mean, obviously, there are talks about a bypass at that same intersection, which may be necessary, but I think we will get a better idea of how that traffic pattern is going to be with that new.
Once the population that uses that area grows accustomed to utilizing that.
Yeah. And sort of what sort of follows with that too, because there's, you got to wonder if it's, what's going to happen once what's being built there gets built there, and then you're going to see a little bit more traffic in that area. So
what do you think somebody like me should know from your industry? Mm-hmm. What are people in your industry thinking about, worried about, that somebody in local government could do something about, or maybe can't do anything about?
Well, I mean, I would say, obviously there's not a lot from like our perspective with regards to, someone qualifying to purchase a house. I mean, that just comes down to what someone's income is, what their debt is, what home prices are. And so that's something that you can directly impact, right? I mean, you can't raise everyone's salary. You can't, put a fiat and lower home prices or anything like that. I guess the question I would have is that for the people who currently are renting, maybe they want to buy, and we are seeing these apartment complexes getting built. And, people say, oh, well, all they're doing is building these luxury apartment complexes and they're not building, affordable units. So from your perspective, what role does government play in? Should we just say, hey, build what you want to build? Or should there be, some more activist wing will say, hey, we should make developers have to build X amount affordable.
Right.
But then you talk to builders and they say, well, all that does is then raise the unit costs for the other properties that aren't affordable. And so, from your perspective, how do you guys think you should handle the affordable sort of rental component, which where a lot of young people are who aren't in home ownership?
Well, I think a major problem is with bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Whenever bureaucracy gets in the way and creates all this red tape, you end up slowing things down for people and creating an increase in cost that ultimately gets passed on to the end user. At the same time, there is a concern, I understand, amongst developers. Well, if you're not going to approve my project, just let me know that sooner rather than later, right? Then drag me out for a multi-year period and the carrying costs that are associated with that. I wish that we could be a little bit more nimble in whether or not we're going to approve projects because they make sense. Mm-hmm. They're the sort and type that we want and need, and we can tell those people, look, you're not green light, but you're looking pretty good.
Yeah.
While there are other projects that are not the type and caliber that we're looking for, that rather than let them have to hustle through and sweat through 2 years of development purgatory, that we can determine up front, guys, this isn't going to happen. And then it allows somebody else to come in that perhaps is more willing to meet the expectation of what it is that we're looking for. Because a lot of times what it is that is being asked of us is, will you rezone a property to allow for significantly more density than is currently allowed? And I get it whenever people say private property rights. Well, private property rights also mean that you bought your property with a certain zoning.
Yes, that's true.
And I am allowed to make my determination about whether or not I want to make a modification to that zoning. So what I'm suggesting is, again, what I would rather see, and I don't know that I've even put this in words as directly as I have to you right now, I would rather see developers take a more conservative approach to density and to, again, try to put a little bit more work into making townhouses and single-family dwelling work. And even if that means that you're going to have a hybrid with some apartments that are also on site, making some options for some private and individual home ownership for people. And that necessarily reduces the amount of units that are available. And I understand that your profit margin may not be the same, but that's something that ultimately I'm probably going to be considering as an important consideration in the days ahead. I do want us to have sufficient housing inventory, but I also want us to have the type of housing inventory that works for all the people in this community. And that, again, means that we've got to almost force folks to recognize apartments aren't the only way to go. We also have to continue building in the traditional model as well.
Well, I think to your point, I think that almost if the permitting process and getting approval is less costly, that if then the density then is redued.
That's exactly
They
my
can
point.
sort of counter.
You
Yeah.
summarized it in a way that was better than what I was able to do. I was
I am the
filibustering.
wordsmith.
I was doing classic politician filibustering.
Hey, I'm here to be the translator. That's all I'm saying. But no, I think I got everything. I got a great quote of you, obviously talking about how great home ownership is. So
Yes.
that's all I needed for the podcast. Everything else I didn't care about. I just wanted you saying.
Who is your favorite local politician?
Is Bill here?
It's Dane Scalise.
Obviously, Commissioner Dane Scalise.
All right, very good.
You're the first one to be on the podcast, so obviously you're my favorite. But Dane, I appreciate it. We went a little longer, so hopefully you didn't miss any meetings.
You're a good friend, and you're doing a great job in your job. Thanks
you.
for educating the public on not only what you do, but how the things that you do are touching areas like local government.
Yeah.
And if there are any other local government officials that you would like to talk to, I'll be happy to reach out to them on your behalf.
We should just go down the road.
Yeah, you should.
I will say, I think you're the only one here, though, so you're the one that's the hard worker, working the hardest.
Sure. You know what? I'm not going to say anything.
All right, Dane.
I am a hard worker.
Thanks so much.
Love you, buddy.
You know what's funny is that before I was supposed to introduce the interview, I was going to tease it by saying that the Brunswick County State Senator, who I could not remember his name, it was R.C. Souls, by the way. I had a big note that said R.C. Souls. I was going to tease it. So everyone was like, why were they talking about R.C. Souls? And yeah, I forgot to do that. So that was the name I was thinking of. R.C. Souls is the name that I and Dane could not think of at the top of our head. It happens. It happens. It is the benefit, though, of podcasting is you can go back and say, hey, I forgot to. That's the name that I was thinking of versus live radio where you just don't know it. And then maybe the next show you have to bring that up. But R.C. Souls was the name. Want to thank, once again, Commissioner Dane Scalise for joining us here on the program. First really non sort of real estate focused interview that I did. But of course, as he mentioned, real estate, a huge, huge impactful part of New Hanover County's economy. And so it directly impacts sort of what they do on the county level with regards to property tax, and just what is happening with the overall economy is directly influenced by what is happening in the real estate industry. And so appreciate him joining us here on the program. As we mentioned, I had Dane on my show many a times when he was the WGI chair, which interestingly enough, I am now on the WDI board. And of course, Dane's still on the board as I believe the commissioner representative. And so at the time he was the chair, bring him on the show. And WDI, phenomenal organization, very happy to be a part of it. And so I used to have him on the show all the time, talk about things that were happening in Wilmington downtown, as well as sort of what was happening kind of in the outer areas. And so once again, I want to thank Dane Scalise, New Hanover County Commissioner, joining us here on the program. And I will be bringing on other politicians because I do think it's important to talk to them, mostly because of the property tax debates, but also development and what impact that is going to have on the overall economy and the impact it's going to have on the real estate sector. And so I do want to talk to politicians. I'm going to continue talking to realtors. I do also want to talk to other people in sort of ancillary businesses. And I mentioned this before, insurance agents. I would like to talk to real estate attorneys, and then maybe more specific inspectors, appraisers, things of that nature, just to give you kind of an idea of, that's sort of the goal with this podcast, is let you guys know what's happening with rates, which of course are determined by what's happening nationally and in some cases internationally, and then what's happening with this particular housing market, the Cape Fear region's housing market. And so talk to people who directly impacted, who know what's going on, is one of the goals of this podcast. So thanks for tuning in. You guys enjoy your Monday. Hopefully you do have all 10 fingers. You have to say toes because who's lighting their, I guess if you had a mishap with your fingers, maybe you're forced to light the firecrackers with your toes. But I'm assuming it's mostly the fingers are the issue. So glad you guys were safe over the July 4th weekend. Enjoy your Monday. Enjoy your Tuesday. We'll be back here Wednesday for another edition of the Cape Fear Reports. And remember, as always, do not wait to buy real estate. You buy real estate and wait.